It has to be engineered, it has to go through a process, it has to go through some of the things I mentioned earlier, a compressor, a limiter, it has that we use or software that we use to input the music. So if you have a studio, you will use software. Cubase is one, Reason, Logic, Luna, these are all sort of DAWs, also Reaper, these are DAWs that people use. Ableton Live. So musicians often, once they practice a song, they can practice that song or they can record it on a two-track or ready to go on vinyl. It has to be engineered by a specific person, a person who's trained in that way. And we also have mastering. These are another new term that we talk about, even though it's been going on for a long time. Back in the 90s, we would go and get dub plates done near Huddersfield. And this guy had his house. He would then have a machine that was a reel-to-reel machine or a cassette machine, or he'd have a vine, or he'd have a turntable. He would then input the signal, which I talked about before, which is the raw wave or the raw MP3, which we call it now, but back then it was just a raw wave, which would be on the cassette. And he would then record that onto his machine through going through certain peripherals, a graphic equalizer, I'd imagine, a compressor, could be a limiter, could be all these sort of things that I talked about. As looking about the technology and how we were able then to get our own personal records, our own personal dub plates. This is how we did it back then, and this is how it's still done to this day. As I had my first recording experience through being in a sound system. I would often record things on cassettes with my friends. We would have a microphone set up, we'd have the turntable, we'd have a cassette recorder because it was very accessible. You could pick them up very cheap and you could record over the cassette many times, 10, 20, 30 times until it split. And so musicians often, once they practice a song, they can practice that song or they can record it on a two-track or on a four-track themselves. But if they want that sound superimposed, so it sounds ready for the radio station, ready to go on vinyl, it has to be engineered by a specific sort of, how can I put it? He would press. That's what it's called. Yeah, pressing that actual sound onto the template, which we call it a dub plate. So it's even though people now can send you MP3 files. But if you want to play that on turntable yourself, you've got to go and get that pressed. I had my first recording experience through being in a sound system. I would often record things on cassettes with my friends. We would have a microphone set up, we'd have the turntable, we'd have a cassette recorder because and you could record over the cassette many times, 10, 20, 30 times until it split. And cassettes would fly around once they was recorded. People want to copy it, and of course, you couldn't just skip to the next track. You could fast forward, but you couldn't skip it like how we do now with CDs. But what I'm really getting at is that we were then being linked with the technology and with the industry. And as I said, I was being linked at an early age because certain people, certain older generation, Godfather, Maverick, Byron, Scorcher, Lennox, they saw that potential. Dan Man, big up to yourself, big up for the Radix. They saw that potential in me at an early age. I've got to big up Baggy as well. These were people who were older than us, and they often saw that they could help us. Again, we'd have to mention Austin Grant, Sean. These were people who were experienced in the music industry and give us sort of their time, their energy, their sort of experience and their knowledge. And we took that in and we used it to our advantage and talk about. And they were our hobbies and they were our great passions as well. And if you have a passion, it's always good to look at it and maybe even revisit it if it's something that you haven't done for a while. Some people are very good at drawing, some people are good at crochet, some people are good at sewing. Some people even make clothes. And I remember in the 90s, there were a lot more tailors about. There were a lot more people who could do these things. There were people who would have their own. Is how the 90s was different. Music was better. Music was written by the artist, and this is something that I sort of I'm passionate about. You know, would write his own lines. MCs now can get away with having a ghostwriter. Is this a good thing? I said no. I said definitely not, because it's sort of taken away from the real idea and the real essence of what talent is about. If you're a talented person, then you should be saying those rhymes, not because somebody looks better than you or has the image that the industry wants to sort of project onto the world. A little bit overweight, maybe they've got a pimple, maybe they've got something that doesn't sort of sit well with the industry. This is what the industry tends to do, and that's what we created back then, and was not just created by us, it was left by our parents. Our parents were doing this. They were getting music sent over from Jamaica because it wasn't being sold in the shop. So when um, shops opened that sold our music, they often did very well. The bigger stores wouldn't take their music. So the older generation were teaching us something that we needed to learn and we needed to know about. That within certain industries or societies, you have to build your own. You have to support your own. You can't just rely on somebody else to bring that in for you, because they're going to bring down a watered down version. That's not what you want. Players who still continue to play music because of the love of it, not because of money. And some of the artists that were big then and some of the songs that they did that were massive anthems are not getting played now. I think that it's going to be in the future is difficult to predict. um, my hope is that these artists then, you know, take back some of the things that I'm saying, and take it on board, and then start really crafting their art and learning about it, learning about some of the old artists, the Lieutenant Stitches, the Papa Sands, the Ninja Mans. Learn about them. Learn about Tiger, people like that who were great artists. Tim Barker, Tony Rebel, um, Marcia Griffiths. These are great artists that should be given their flowers now while they're still going. They've been going for 3, 4, 5 decades and still going strong, some of them. It's just got a direct bearing on the 90s, I'd say. It's just how it is. That they were from the 90s and they were big in the 90s, but things change and they keep up the pace with the pace, because I'm in the UK. UK has a lot of opportunities over here. If you remember George Michael was signed to those big labels, and he had a dispute with them and weren't being recognized in the way that he wanted it to be. So he decided to move away from that. This caused problems for him. And then what went on, these were great artists from the 90s. George Michael, Prince, great artists who had a lot of #1 hits. Then they decided that he was no longer going to call himself Prince. He was going to use the term or a symbol as his way of being recognized. Clever move, if you understand what was going on in the background. I believe that the record companies were making millions off of his music, and he was getting very little return for that. And he was a multi-talented musician, could play every instrument, and often did on his songs, and also wrote his songs. I'm not saying he wrote all his songs, but he wrote, I would say, a vast amount. That writing the song is very lucrative for any artist. So the songwriter is often going to make more money than the singer. Look at people like Drake. Drake doesn't write all his songs. Some people say, well, it doesn't matter the stature that he's reached. Same we could say about Beyonce. Same we could say about Jay-Z. We could say about many rappers. A good thing for them in their career, because they don't have to then go and front that song. They can just get the royalties off of it. But if you read Bill Cosby, even we can look at Michael Jackson, Bill Cosby's story, or Kelly's story. You know, even though I can still appreciate some of his songs and appreciate his songwriting skills. Veteran, I'm now a veteran of the industry, so I can talk as a veteran. And I love on this. The 90s gave me great experiences with the sound system, being a selector, being a DJ, being in front of a crowd, writing my own lyrics, then performing those lyrics, then being noticed by people in the industry, had an experience of being in that environment, knowing that what all the buttons were and all the sliders were. This is an experience that is good at sports. Get them training at a young age, get them into a club, or